questions that they want to have answered today, we'll collect those so we can try to get them answered on the spot. And there's also a place to mark if you would rather be contacted privately later through an email or phone call and not have a, public discussion of that question at the moment. Okay.
Yeah. So what we thought we would do today, as asked by UPC and Julie, is that first we want to talk about what exactly does student services do? It's a really big role. There's a lot of different things that fall under our umbrella of student services. And oftentimes we do a lot of triage because if there's a challenge and my student was riding the bus home, that seems like something to call student services about because my student was involved. And so in that situation, we'll hear the concern and then we might triage that out to transportation. After we talk about what we do, then we're going to talk about the changes to the family student handbook that we presented to the board last spring. It was a really good idea that came out of the board. I think board member Dr. Lim had said, how do the site leadership, how do they know about the changes? How do moms and dads know about the changes? So we are grateful for the opportunity to come talk to United Parent Council, and we hope that you spread the word to your individual site teams back at your schools. And then after that, we have time for questions and answers. And finally, actually, I skipped over that little indented bullet. There was a request for us to kind of talk about the top maybe 10 things that we think moms and dads should really know about the handbook. And so we've identified some of those for you. So underneath the student services umbrella, I'll talk about some of the things that I do, and then Danielle will talk about the things that she does. I have student discipline, and so does Danielle. We both will look at being in secondary. I often will have conversations with site leaders, assistant principals, families about student discipline for students that are in grades 7 through 12. Daniel typically will do the ones kindergarten through 6th grade, but we swap back and forth. We're very much a team effort. But then I also have the formal disciplinary hearings. And what that means is that a student may have violated the code of conduct or violated the handbook in such a manner that they might be up for a long-term suspension or a suspension that goes 11 days on up to 180. They might be subject to alternative home or alternative school placement, which could be going to Sweetwater. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. And then also it could be something we call alternative home placement, where the student is going to learn online through Paradise Valley Online and have some stipulations and some things that they need to do to get back to their regular brick and mortar school, or they could be up for expulsion. And it's a very formalized process. Marshall has been one of our hearing officers for quite some time. The way that it's done is that we have 3 hearing officers. 2 of them are community members, and one of those hearing officers is our one of our assistant principals from a middle or a high school, but not related to that student. So if that student maybe was at a middle school and we were looking for an assistant principal to be a part of that hearing for that student, we would make sure that we're choosing not that same middle school assistant principal, and then also not a high school assistant principal that student might matriculate to. But that's a very formalized process. We take the recommendations from the hearing officers. If the recommendation is anything except expulsion, we accept the hearing officer's recommendation as it is. If the recommendation is expulsion, only the governing board can expel a student. And so that will have to go to the governing board for them to consider. If the family appeals that recommendation for expulsion, they will have an opportunity to present their rationale for the appeal directly to the governing board. Typically that's done in an executive session, so either before or after the regular governing board meeting behind closed doors, but families can choose to have that done in public. I've not yet had that happen. I also am in charge of the emergency response planning that happens within our district emergency response team. I facilitate that group that has many of our directors. So the director of transportation, the director of facilities, the director of nutrition, the director of information and technology, our public information officers are a part of that. And that makes sense because in the event that we have a large scale emergency, all of those individuals are going to be responsible for us coming out and supporting that site or that school that's going through that tragic event. But there's also teachers, administrators, support personnel, parents that are on that meeting. And here's a selfish plug. I have one person that's on that meeting now from our parent community, and we would like to have more. So if you're interested in being part of the district-wide emergency response team, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. From there, what we do is we will talk about larger issues as it comes to school safety, but we also will develop the tabletop exercises that we send to the sites, that each school emergency response team is responsible for going through that type of practice, that type of thought thinking about how they would respond in an emergency situation. We also make sure that we update the district or our school emergency response plan. So we do that on an annual basis, and we take that template and we provide that to our sites as well. And over the last 3-4 years, there have been some changes that have happened within that plan. You might be aware that 3 years ago, in the event that we had a threat on campus, our direction to our teachers and to our students was to lock themselves behind a closed door and hunker down in the corner. And we've changed that. Now we are an options-based response. So if the safest thing for a classroom to do is to evacuate and separate themselves by time and distance from the threat, then do it. Run. We would rather kids keep running until they feel safe. And that might mean that we have a student that's out in the community for 3 hours, but we still have that student. And that's really our key. So those types of changes or those types of conversations take place in terms of emergency response planning. Also, part of that is our school safety program grant. So we have, through the Arizona Department of Education, we have applied for upwards of $4 million to provide us with 17 school resource officers. And by the way, the city of Phoenix has 67 total school resource officers. Paradise Valley has 17 of them. We are the largest district, we are the district that has the most school resource officers out of the city of Phoenix. But the grant also we have a school resource officer from Scottsdale Police Department that is covering Grayhawk, Pinnacle Peak, and Sonoran Sky. We also have social workers and counselors that are part of that grant as well, because it's not just about having armed security in the school, it's about having preventative measures in place and making sure that we're meeting the needs of our students, that we're building relationships, that we have mechanisms to prevent any type of school violence. So it's not just about responding. And that grant, by the way, is coming up for renewal. The grant is on a 3-year cycle. We are finishing the 3rd year of that grant cycle, and each of our schools will have to apply. They have to apply individually. They'll submit all of their responses to the narrative questions to me, and then I upload that into an electronic system that the Department of Education has and uses, but we have to submit all as one district. So our schools come probably mid-January to middle of February, we'll be writing, and our goal is to submit as quickly as possible. In years past, it has been a little bit of a first come, first serve. This year, I really anticipate it's going to be a very competitive grant because of, one, we've got some school districts like Phoenix Union High School District. They stepped away from the grant, and now they're thinking about coming back into the grant. And one of the things that happened at the Department of Education is they realized that they were awarding many schools school resource officers. But as an example, there's more than 67 schools in the city of Phoenix, and yet they only have 67 school resource officers. And so the Department of Education is allowing districts and schools to give the money back to the Department of Education, where they will hire school safety officers to come in and support. And so I think a lot of rural schools will be going that route because they may not have been able to get an SRO back in the day, but now they can get a school safety officer. And then I also, underneath my umbrella, have student records, and that can be everything from enrollment. We get a lot of court orders, trying to figure out, we have a family that may have split, so who has the rights to enroll the child, who can withdraw the child, Can somebody have access to the child? Can somebody have access to the school records? So everything at enrollment time is when we're really teasing that information. And then we hold those records into perpetuity. So I get phone calls, believe it or not, every now and again. It's like, I think I graduated in 1984. And so then we have to go back into the records and see if they actually did meet the graduation requirements from way back in the 1980s. And then finally, underneath my, well, two things. Finally, underneath my umbrella is caring concern. So when things happen at the district, at a school site, so maybe a car accident happened in the community and a child was injured, and that's going to have a deep impact on that learning community. And so we will have school counselors, social workers, school psychologists. They are trained in what's called Prepare 2, which is mental health triage, and they're trained to go out and work with students and staff members that might be in crisis following a tragic event that happens inside of their community. So I have a team that is ready to go at a minute's notice to go out and support the school. I help coordinate that. And then finally, I do this family student handbook. And so that's eventually, after we get through what we do, we'll talk about the changes that happen in the process that we use to make the revisions to the handbook.
So under my umbrella, I am the district compliance officer for section 504. So our students that are eligible for and need accommodations to access the general education are able to work with the site leadership and the site 504 coordinators to develop a plan to help access, remove barriers and access accommodations to support their education. And also under my umbrella is the health services department. So that is our school nurses. So that involves making sure that their AED is accessible to everyone on campus. As you can imagine, at the high school level with multiple buildings and multiple sports happening at the same time, there's a lot of coordination that goes into making sure that they're accessible and monitored appropriately, and have batteries and pads and all of those different things, along with all of the training components with our school nurses to make sure that they're ready to care for our students. And the multi-tiered system of support, otherwise known as MTSS, encompasses a lot of different components. So that encompasses implementing tiered supports for students in an academic fashion. So making sure that students receive supports to fill skill deficits, and then also more significant supports in the general education setting and in the settings where specialized services are implemented into the continuum. It also includes what you'll know as PBIS, so all of the acronyms that are at the school sites, whether it be SOAR or Spark or RISE. We have all sorts of different acronyms. Those acronyms are implemented at the site level with teams to really have all stakeholders embrace a culture that's rooted in making expectations clear for students, for staff, and for parents, so that we all have a common language and a common perspective about how we act at school and on the bus and in our different locations. I know that next month you'll be talking with Sam Doyle about the PBIS expectations in the digital space. I know there's been a lot of work going into that. Thank you. Because that's become another location as technology has changed and our kids enter in and out of a digital, space and back into the reality with your feet on the ground. So PBIS is a part of those tiered supports. So at the basic level, we establish expectations, and then when students need additional support to calibrate their behavior to the expectations on the site, we have a variety of supports that we implement as teachers and specialists on campus to support our kiddos. The initiative it's been a part of the district initiative for a number of years to implement and practice with our multi-tiered systems of support. So it's been really a pleasure to serve in that way. Chris, do you want to talk about the specifics of the support plans and
Sure.
how we can set
Sure. So, when we're talking about student discipline as an example, when we have a student that might return to the campus following an exclusion time, like maybe they've been suspended for a day for the behavior that they exhibited, we don't want that behavior to repeat itself. And so we work very closely with the schools to put support plans in place for our students. So because the negative consequence isn't necessarily going to shape and change the behavior. It's going to be the way that we work with that student. They might need additional supports, which means like maybe a tier 2 intervention. Maybe they need a trusted adult to check in and check out with at the beginning and the end of the day. Somebody to encourage them to make good choices and things like that. Those support plans also can follow when a student makes a threat. We have a very robust threat assessment process. And so if somebody does make a threat against an individual or the school, one, we're going to dig deep into that to figure out why they made that threat, to provide them with support so they don't have a grievance against the school or an individual. But we also then support the school staff in putting a safety plan in place for the individual that may have been targeted or the school as a whole. So we're always we're in the process of developing those types of plans. Not My Kid and More. Another type of support that we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about under the things that parents need to know, is that when a student has violated the drug and alcohol policy, that we have a specific approach to that they are excluded from school. But rather than having a long suspension, we will mitigate that down to a shorter suspension if they take place and do some counseling. And through Not My Kid, they have a program that's called Project Rewind. They use grant funding. It's free to all of our families. And they have the opportunity then to talk with the student about why they might be choosing to use or experiment. They'll talk with moms and dads about how they can help manage that type of behavior at home. They bring the students and their families together, and then they have some time apart as well. So through that type of intervention, what we're trying to do is to prevent the behavior from happening again. So that's another type of support plan. It's also a restorative practice, which is one of the changes that took place in our handbook, and we'll talk about in a minute.
And then there's a whole host of things that fall under this, that this slide would be, there's already a lot. So the slide would be so much longer. Retention and promotion, attendance, support, those types of things that come later in the presentation. So this is more of a sampling of what we do. Early entrance to kindergarten testing. We have, a lot of elementary schools, so it's a centralized process for our families that are interested in accessing kindergarten for younger students. And so we do host a number 3 in early kindergarten testing dates over the summer so that parents are able to have their student engage in an assessment and possibly enter kindergarten early and see how it goes with the little ones in the 5-year-old classroom.
Before you click,
Sure.
so you can see there's a lot that falls underneath our department. So it makes, and if you were to dive into the family and student handbook, you're going to see a lot of these topics there. So it makes perfect sense why our department is charged with ensuring that the handbook is updated on a regular basis, because we really have a lot of control over a lot of that. Click.
So we are a thought partner for parents, for administrators, to really help move through a lot of the operational business and the operations on campus, because navigating systems can be overwhelming at times. There's a lot of different moving parts. And sometimes it really is so helpful to have someone who has a bird's eye view to really pinpoint what are the things that we need to talk about. So we serve as a thought partner for all parties much of the time.
Yeah, and we don't, the neat thing with site leaders, our assistant principals and principals, we don't supervise them. So we offer good advice, but they can still, do what they believe is best for their school. When moms and dads give us a phone call, we are there to listen, we're there to acknowledge, we're there to support. But again, we're going to be offering advice back to that school. So we don't really dictate how things unfold, but we really try to help guide people in how they maybe should unfold. Because we spend a lot of our time in the family and student handbook. We spend a lot of time referencing board policy. We spend a lot of time diving into the Arizona revised statutes to find the information that we need to best support the site and to best support moms and dads, because ultimately it's our homeschool team that's going to best support the child. And when we can't find the answer, we have a few lawyers on speed dial. And so we can go get the answers that we need as well. So To that point, when we're working with moms and dads, one of the things that, as a district, we have a firm philosophy that issues should be resolved at the lowest level. So if it's a classroom issue, we want the family and the teacher to have a conversation, to build a homeschool team, and to find the best path forward. If that doesn't work out, then we would ask that our moms and dads then go to the site leadership to talk with the principal. The principal may end up having a conversation with their site team, but we're still trying to solve that challenge or resolve that issue at the site level. And then if that doesn't work, then it can get escalated up to the district level. And at that point, you're most likely going to have a conversation with Danielle and I. And again, we might triage it. The conversation might be a challenge with curriculum. And then what we might do is we might farm that out to the right and appropriate curriculum coaches to help support both the teacher and the student, and the family to ultimately best support the student. And inside of our handbook, and I do want to say one thing, please, we always want to presume positive intentions. So that's something that Danielle and I talk a lot with our site leaders and with moms and dads about, is that, we all have the same interest in mind, which is that the student is successful. And just always trying to remember that passion and frustrations can sometimes lead to maybe less than nice language. But ultimately, what we're hoping is that through inquiry, we can have, a productive conversation to get to the outcome that is best suited for the student. And on pages 27 and 28 of our handbook, that's where we talk about really having a strong team approach in achieving excellence in education. That's a good conversation about the teamwork that's required. We talk for students to be successful, it's like a three-legged stool. One leg is the parent, one leg is the teacher, one leg is the student. And if any of those are not doing their job, then the stool is going to fall over. So it takes a whole team approach.
Can I ask a clarifier?
Yeah.
Site council, do you mean like the school council?
Yes.
Because that means, okay,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yep.
Perfect.
And so then for the changes and updates to the family student handbook, and this is where it becomes a little bit more of the Chris show, because that was my charge, was to be the facilitator of that committee. And our committee's purpose was to review the language in the handbook to ensure that it clearly and accurately states our policies and our practices, and that we're adhering to the Arizona revised statutes. So, and we want to make sure that that language, as we communicate policy and practice, that it's, for it to be clear, we have to understand the parent's perspective, we have to understand the teacher's perspective, we have to understand our ESP staff support and our building leaders. So we create a large committee to do that. But our charge is not to change policy and practice. So if by chance something comes up, and sometimes it does, they're like, well, that's an interesting way of doing things. Why are we doing it like that here in PV schools? Well, our small little committee is not charged with coming up with a better solution. We would then identify it and then pass that on to another work group or another study or executive leadership like cabinet to clarify and then make those changes. Our job is just to make sure that whatever we are doing, we're clearly communicating that, both for families to be aware of, and then also for our site leaders to follow. We follow a call to committee process. And so we had parents that through this call to the committee process, Rebecca and Dorothy joined our committee and sat in and spent a lot of time, energy, and effort. Jay, who's not here today, but she was also one of our parents. We had educational support staff, certified teachers, and Dr. Suzanne O'Day is our lead school psychologist, and she falls underneath that work group, and some administrators as well. So this whole group was charged with meeting on a regular basis to really tease out and get deep into the weeds, word by word, into the handbook. Click. But not everything inside of that handbook falls underneath our umbrella. A lot of it does, but not everything. There's information in there about facilities and finance and budget, human resources, information and technology. So all of these directors were also involved in the process behind the scenes. Risk management, Adam Wynn. So sometimes we wanted to clarify language about insurance, so we went to him about that. There's information on extracurricular and athletics, so we made sure that the athletic director was involved, Mr. Newland. There's a whole section 3 is about health and student health in those types of support services. So our 3 lead nurses were involved in that. Our lead counselor, when it comes to being an expert in the graduation requirements and record keeping guidelines. Danielle and I facilitated, and Dr. Corson was who I could go back and soundboard with, and he sponsored this committee work. Long process, and so it started back in November of last year. And at that point, what I did is I took all of the language that had to do with a specific director. So if there was something in there about buses, then I clipped that little piece from the handbook and sent it off to the director of transportation. Or if it had to do with facilities, I clipped that piece and sent it off to Dr. Davis in facilities, and made sure that every one of those directors that had a part or a hand, or the lead nurses or the lead athletic director, if they had skin in the game with the language that was in that book, they got that language back on November 25th to start reviewing it. And then they were sending me ideas. And then at that point, what I was doing is putting together a working document based on last year's book, and we started creating a red line copy for the 2025 book. And you can see that Dorothy and Rebecca got a lot of hours in. They had over 9 hours where we came together on a weekly basis. They had homework, and we're going to review these sections. And then when we came together, we literally go through it line by line and have that conversation. Is this clear? That doesn't seem that clear. Well, we thought it was clear, but it's not as clear as we thought it could be. So that's that back and forth. All those committee members at the same time were working together, creating those changes on screen for everybody to see together. We thought we had it done. On March 26th, I sent the final red line copy to the committee for them to do an electronic review and to approve it or to send in further questions. Turned out we weren't done. The initial language was suggested, and then that was sent out to the committee again for an electronic review for a final copy. Click. But we weren't done yet, because it turned out that the governor had signed a couple of bills. And so we had Governor Hobbs signed a bill about cell phones in the classrooms, and signed a bill regarding parental rights. And so we had our first read prepared for the board, but we weren't ready to go to the board because we had to do a little bit more tweaking. And then on May 5th, we finally had a final copy that we took to the board for a first read. And even at the governing board, it's part of the process. They're part of our community as well. They had suggestions too. And it turned out that sometime in the middle of March that I didn't catch, there was a city ordinance about whether or not how old you had to be to ride an electric bike. And that changed. And so the board caught it, which was great, because then we could take that back. And by the time we made it to the second reading of our governing board, that they were then prepared to approve the content that was inside of the book. Just for and by the way, we'll make available everything that I'm saying is basically written down on a piece of paper for you, so that way you can articulate it back to your schools. I am going to read, because I'm just using the language that was part of the presentation to the governing board. So if I happen to slip into present tense, it's because this was language back in May, and here we are in August. So some of the changes that we made. The Family Student Handbook Review Committee found and corrected as many grammatical errors as we could as we went through the book. However, the truth of the matter is the book has been written over several years by several committees. And so the tone changed, the tenses changed. And so when we had that first read, the governing board directed us to get a proofreader. And so we actually did that. We got our English language arts curriculum specialist. What a great proofreader. So we handed the document over to her, and we did pay her for her time. And then what she did is she went through and reformatted. She made sure that we were using parent and guardians throughout the document, that it had a single voice. I think the content was always a 6 on the 6th grade writing rubric, But the grammatical use and the voice was probably a 2 because of it had been written by so many people. The committee also closely examined each of the hyperlinks that are embedded throughout the document. So if you go online, there's a lot of resources ready for you to click into. But we wanted to ensure that the links were active and they were taking the user to the desired location. And we discovered and we also discussed at length which hyperlinks should be in there, because we could really hyperlink you everywhere, right? But we chose just to have us link to board policies, Arizona revised statutes, PB schools forms, and that's really specific to nutrition, and then also anonymous tips. And anonymous tips, when you submit, you say the school, it goes to their site leadership that if you have an anonymous tip for them, that they need to go investigate. For the document to clearly convey our practices, it also had to read easily. And while this was top of mind throughout our review, the committee did give special attention to 2 sections: attendance requirements and digital citizenship and student technology use. Were really 2 areas we focused in on. Chronic absenteeism and emerging technologies were very timely topics at the time, and we wanted to ensure that these sections were easy to read and to comprehend. While there is new language in those sections, much of the language was already there, and we simply reorganized it to increase its readability. I'm gonna use my finger. Oh, there you are. So then we talked to the board about these were the notable changes throughout the document that took place last year. Sweetwater Community School. So is often thought of as a school where students who are in trouble are sent, but in actuality, the vast majority of students that attend Sweetwater are there by choice, and many of them are there in an effort to catch up on credits. It's really shifted over the last couple of years from being a place where students who were in trouble were isolated and asked to go, to where students are now going that because they can make up their credits quicker now. And so we wanted to make sure that all of the reasons why people would go to Sweetwater Community School or to alternative education were mentioned. The committee was also made aware of a requirement for the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act of 1986 that families are to be notified annually that the district inspects schools for asbestos, and all schools have an asbestos plan, which is maintained in the school office. The committee recommended adding language to the Family Student Handbook to meet the reporting requirements of the AHERA Act. And then, as previously stated with regard to board policies, they were referenced, the hyperlinks were put together throughout the book, but we also felt as a committee how important it is for moms and dads to know where all of the board policies are kept. So we put a blurb into the handbook and recommended that language be put into the handbook so parents would know where all the policies can be found. In an era of cell phones and social media, schools are often called upon to address unkind and bullying behavior that takes place between students using digital technologies. Sometimes those interactions take place outside of school hours and off of the school campus. However, if there's a nexus to the school has the right and the responsibility to intervene. And the committee recommended adding language throughout the handbook where appropriate to clearly define cyberbullying and to inform students and families of the possible consequences for engaging in such behavior. Talking about cell phones, as stated before, there was new legislation that took place and wireless communication devices and social media access during the school day. These devices now, after being signed into law by Governor Hobbs, these devices can only be used for educational purposes in emergency situations and when medically necessary. For example, a student might be using their cell phone to monitor their blood glucose levels. So the committee then recommended the adding of that language into the handbook so that way our families knew that our schools will adhere to the new legislation. And then additionally, last year, Mr. Billings and the IT department, they implemented a layered approach to releasing permissions within the Google Suite. So some of you that have maybe students that are in 6th grade a couple years back, you were able to email back and forth with them. And then all of a sudden that got cut off because they don't have access to outside email anymore. So this layered approach to releasing student information and our student permissions in Google Suite, ensuring that appropriate access to email and chat as students progress through their grade levels. And since the last revision, so we put all that information in the handbook. Artificial intelligence, as spoken about earlier today, and generative technology have become more advanced and are increasingly more woven into the educational process. The committee recommended adding language to the handbook to notify parents and guardians when certain technology permissions are granted to our students. And we also recommended adding language stating the district's expectation when using AI and generative technology for educational purposes. This past year, PV schools added restorative practice. So I talked about that if a student is caught with drugs or alcohol, that they'll go to Not My Kid for Project Rewind. Well, we also have a tremendous amount of students that are getting caught with nicotine vape pens and using nicotine. And so last year, one of our school nurses developed a restorative practice where it's a nicotine awareness program. So our students today that get caught using nicotine, rather than a straight up suspension, moms and dads have the opportunity to send their student to a nicotine awareness program. It can lead into a cessation program, but right now it's just having a conversation. Why are you using? How do you think people are marketing to you? How do mom and dad feel about it? And so we put that nicotine prevention program, which was a practice, into the handbook. Let's see here. I'll jump ahead. All right, so our schools are staffed with many social workers, school counselors, psychologists, and other staff willing and able to support students and families. And in addition, we have on our website, we list some resources for our families. The committee made a recommendation to add that information into the handbook. Across our district, parents and guardians donate their time, resources to our schools. Many donate treats to the classroom. And so to that point, we put some information into the handbook with regard to making sure that those treats are appropriate for school, encouraging the parents and guardians to reach out to school administration first. A few times each year, for a variety of reasons, high school students will drop a course after the 20th day without realizing that per record keeping guidelines, the F will remain on their transcript. And so that we wanted to make sure that that was in the handbook. Students can retake that class and earn a replacement grade, but the F remains on the transcript, and the committee recommended that language. The committee recommended adding language to the handbook to notify parents of their right to be involved in their child's education. That was part of the new law signed by Governor Hobbs. So included in this, their child's education included new language is the information on how parents can access Follett Destiny systems to review books and learning materials in their school's media center. It directs parents on where they can find information on human growth and development curriculum and the clubs and organizations that are offered at their school. The committee noticed that the language in the parent guardian resource section was really language describing PV Schools United Parent Council. So we made a recommendation to change the title of that section. We live in a fast-paced society, and parents and guardians may call upon other friends and family members to pick up their child at school. However, we can't just release kids to anybody. So we made a recommendation of adding language to the handbook that explains the process and procedures. And really specifically, we have high school students that might be charged by their parents to go pick up a younger sibling. So we put some information on how to get that done. And that's by making sure that that older student is now an emergency contact for the younger student, and that allows us to release. And then a final notable change in the general policy section is that our school resource officer team made us aware that the Phoenix City codes related to electronic motorized bicycles. We learned that the city of Phoenix, you must be 16 years of age to ride an e-bike. And so to that point, a lot of our site leaders were also sharing with us just what they were witnessing of some of our students that were riding bicycles going 35 miles an hour and the dangers that they were presenting not only to themselves, but also to other people trying to come and go from school. So we put some language in there that you need to be 16. And by the way, the city of Scottsdale has also adopted that as well. Within Scottsdale, you need to be 16. Okay, click. And then we had some behavior expectations. There's a whole section related to the behavior expectations. You might consider that our code of conduct. There were very few recommended changes in section 4. The Arizona Revised Statute 15843 provides guidance on issuing suspensions to students who are in kindergarten through 4th grade. And we had in the book the link to that statute, but we figured, why don't we just explain what that means? So that way parents don't have to click somewhere. We already have it in the book. And then under the definition of cheating and plagiarism, Several assistant principals in the committee felt it important to add language around AI and or generative technology. As this technology advances, teachers are seeing an increase in the number of students that are submitting work that was clearly done by a bot, and they're submitting it as if it was their own work. So that is cheating, that's plagiarism. So we put it into the book. Okay, click. All right, should I just keep rolling?
Yeah.
Do you want it? No, okay.
Yeah, but.
That's true, that's true. All right. So then, like I said, out of the board, a really great question. You know, how did everybody know about this? So what we did is we provided a red line copy to all of our site administrators. We had time at both our principal meetings and our assistant principal, teachers on assignment and dean, so we call that the APTOA dean meeting, where they could also discuss some of those new changes. And, you know, in particular, e-bikes was kind of a hot topic for our site leaders. The phones was a hot topic, I think, for everybody. And so we had some discussion about that. We talked about parental rights and making sure that our site leaders were, our parents have always had all of these rights. There wasn't like anything new that came out, but we really wanted to make sure that our site leaders are developing the relationships with parents to build and strengthen the homeschool team. So we had opportunities to talk about that. We had opportunities to talk about how are you going to communicate this out to your sites or to your families and to your to the community. More importantly, we also had conversations about our PBS expectations. The great thing about positive behavior intervention and supports is that we want to clearly state to our students what is the rule, what's the expectation. You know, we expect you to walk down the stairs, not run, right? And so how do we communicate some of the changes to the handbook directly to our students? And so that was part of the discussion that we had with our site leadership. And these are the top 10 things that we think you should know about the handbook.
All right, so we started with, having this conversation about the handbook is not just the big stuff. It's not a place to turn only when we're talking about long-term suspension, expulsion. It has everything in there. It's our tool to communicate. And something that we realized along the way was that our definitions of different types of absences weren't clearly articulated. And so that was one of the updates that was made. But something really important to know about it as a parent or guardian is the state does not recognize the difference between an excused absence and an unexcused absence. An absence is an absence is an absence. And so in terms of students being in a chronically absent status, the state does not recognize if the child was out sick with strep throat one day versus on a family vacation. And so it's important for us, to us that parents are aware of that, because it does have, it puts students into a spot where they're labeled as chronically absent. But for our district purposes and for the purposes of students navigating their school day and makeup work and taking tests when they return and things like that, it's very important that absences are excused, unexcused, so that they're treated appropriately. And making sure that everyone is aware that a call to the school for an excused absence needs to occur prior to the absence or within 24 hours of the start of the school day when the child is absent. And that's the window in which to call an excused absence. And then the attendance expectations were not clearly articulated in the document. So we made sure to add in language that our expectation is that students are 90% in attendance. Of course, we love 100% attendance, but we don't want kids coming to school and sick, coming when they're sick, and we understand things happen. So the expectation is now clearly articulated at 90%. And then there's a lot of, I think it's a couple pages of information about attendance so that it's all there. The definition of bullying, and that's sort of moving into the technology space. So
Well, and also we often will get telephone calls and they'll say, my child's being bullied. And bullying has a very specific definition. It doesn't mean that we're not going to address unkind behaviors, but we're really working to shape that there is a specific definition and there's specific processes that must take place by board policy if in fact somebody reports bullying. And so part of it is our guidance and advice back to our site leaders based on what's in the book. And part of it is our guidance and working with families to really clearly define what the behavior is.
And so it links to the policy and the paperwork that is associated with filing a complaint and the expectations and also the time frame. Our time frame discusses initiating an investigation rather than the conclusion, because the point of an investigation is for it to be comprehensive. So we really point to the initiation of a bullying investigation and those definitions.
Under court orders, I think it's important for parents to know that we follow the latest court orders that are in the cumulative file, and that only a court order can change a court order. Sometimes we have family members that are in a split situation, and one of the parents has been deemed the sole decision maker or the final decision maker. That doesn't mean that they have the right to cut the other parent out. That would take a court order. And so we really just wanted to articulate that we really do need to follow what the courts are saying in terms of who has custody when, who can make decisions to withdraw, who can make decisions to do something like special education testing, or even to approve a field trip. So it's important for families to know that. And then the other thing I'll just share is that we will do our absolute best to follow all these court orders. But the truth of the matter is, like an injunction against harassment, as an example, we don't enforce court orders. Police enforce court orders. And so if there's an issue, then that's when we're going to involve either the school resource officer or we'll call the police non-emergency number to get the police out to help support enforcing those enforcing those court orders. FERPA, it really boils down to this. We promise not to talk about your child with other parents. And we also promise that we're not going to talk about other people's children with you. Right? And that's really what it boils down to. But there's lots of information inside of the handbook regarding FERPA. There's lots of information on directory information, like you making sure if you don't want your name, your telephone number, and your address published or whatever falls underneath directory information, then you have the right to make sure that we don't provide that information. Record keeping guidelines. I spoke a little bit about that before, but that's really important for parents to know. What are the graduation requirements? What happens if by chance you drop those courses? I think that's something really I would encourage all freshman parents to really kind of get their arms wrapped around, so that way it's not a shock in the second semester of your senior year. That there's just good, clear understanding all the way through. Retention guidelines
And framework, and timeframes. So, teachers obviously speak with parents about student progress. This applies mainly to grades K through 8. So teachers have conversations with parents about student academic progress. And then if it seems, according to data, appropriate to have retention conversations about students repeating in grade level, the process starts in January. And so January through the end of the school year is when we're having a conversation and including retention as a component of the conversation. So the timelines to be aware of in terms of the handbook communication, that it begins in January. By April, there's been an indication of whether or not a student should be recommended for retention. And then there is an appeal process that parents are able to engage in if there's not an agreement between the school and the parent, whether it be for promotion or for retention. And then we set an appeal hearing date at the end of May. It's on May 22nd this year, so that if the two parties aren't on the same page, that we can work through the appeal process and evaluate the evidence and make a recommendation for the student to either be retained or promoted. And then public concerns and complaints, also known as it applies to our policy KAB. It ranges all the way from an issue that's a concern with an employee being handled at the site level, all the way to it being handled by human resources or the appropriate assistant superintendent. And so we, do have conversations with parents to support an understanding of the process and how one might engage in the process if it feels like a concern or complaint isn't being handled the way that one would like it handled.
There's about 3 pages of the handbook that is dedicated to that process. I also want to make sure that our secondary families are very clear that that there are some infractions in the handbook that are expellable on the first offense. And one of the things that we hold very close, or we hold strongly to, is students that have multiple drug and alcohol offenses. So if they're in possession or under the influence of, the first time that a student is caught under the influence or in possession of is a 9-day suspension. But we will reduce that to 5 days if the student participates in drug and alcohol counseling. And typically that's done through Not My Kid. Again, we have a relationship with that organization and we can put that up free of charge for our families. The second offense per the handbook is expellable. We don't typically expel. What we do is it's a very student-centered approach, is that in lieu of the expulsion, we will alternatively home place the student for a period of time. And so that means that they're now learning online. It means that they have to do some restorative practices. They have to do community service. They have to write a reflection piece. What am I learning from this experience? They need to have a non-family member make a recommendation that they are somebody who's in good standing and should deserve to come back to a brick and mortar setting. That they have to participate in that further drug counseling, and they also have to provide us with 3 tests that are drug free, that they 3 negative drug tests over a 3-month span before they re-enter our buildings, and that can catch people off guard, because if they have that second offense within 365 days, this is the process that we're going to follow. Now, I also mentioned that one of the things that falls underneath my umbrella is the formal disciplinary process. So there might be a situation where a family says, I don't believe in this, I don't agree with this. And so they have an option to appeal that, and they would appeal that by taking it to a formal disciplinary hearing. And then we would then follow the recommendations based on our 3 hearing officers, the 2 community members, and the assistant principal. The other thing is that if you are caught selling, we will go directly to a hearing. And that's also in our handbook. And those are really the 2 big things that really happen within the school setting that really get kids into deep water quickly. And when I talk about selling, I'm actually talking about, they've come to school, they've got multiple wax cartridges. That's, when they vape, that's called a wax pen. The wax cartridge is what they're using that has the marijuana derivative in it. They've got multiple cartridges. They've got $80 in their pocket. Looks like they're smelling, or so looks like they're selling. Seems they're selling, right? If we're in the bathroom and it's puff puff pass, that's not selling. So that we've just got a lot of people that have now been wrapped up in either in possession or under the use. But that's something that we have really a lot of conversations with our assistant principals, so we have consistency across our district. And we're really working hard with our assistant principals across all of the schools to make sure that if a student has an infraction in one school and a similar student has an infraction in another school, that their consequences are the same, that there's no lottery involved on who you happen to be with.
I just have clarification.
Yeah.
This is all for drug use on campus, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
just wondering.
And then appealing a short-term suspension. It's in the handbook that if a student is suspended for 10 days or less, or they received in-school isolation or an in-school suspension, so anything underneath that 10 days, or they have a lunch detention, or they have whatever the consequence is, they have to maybe do a reflective essay or maybe do some research on that infraction. All of that is appealed to the school principal. So when we get the telephone call that I'm upset and I'm mad about this, we don't usurp the authority of the school leader. Well, so we will then direct people back to the school principal. Now, we might help facilitate the conversation so that way we can ensure that all parties are being heard, right? And that all the information is out there, but ultimately the appeal of it, of anything less than a 10-day suspension is that of the principal. You want to search, want me to just keep rolling?
Just keep
I'll keep rolling. So search and seizure, very important to know that we are held to the standard of reasonable suspicion. So that's much lower than probable cause, right? So if we have a reasonable suspicion that a student is under the influence or has brought contraband to school, then we have not only the right, but the duty to search that student for that contraband. And this isn't something that a family can say no to. If the search is denied and they're saying you cannot, we're not gonna allow you to search, that's okay, we're not going to search. But we're now going to assume that you were in possession of that contraband and we will move forward with that process. And then finally, under threat assessment, purpose and process, a couple years back, we did put into the handbook our threat assessment process. And so we take all threats seriously. The student that is just frustrated in line and somebody cut him again and they're just so angry and they yell, I'm gonna kill all of you, right? We take that threat seriously. We will go through a threat assessment process. To determine the likelihood that that threat would be carried out, to determine, the severity of the threat. But more important, the purpose of a threat assessment is for a multidisciplinary team to come together. Or, it might be done right out of the gate with the principal because they know that student very well, right? And they know it's a transient threat that was made out of frustration. But the ultimate goal and purpose of a threat assessment is for us to determine, is to determine why that student has a grievance against an individual or against the school. Because our goal is ultimately to support that child. If we can take their grievance away, we've taken their threat away. And so our first instincts is always like, they made a threat, suspend them, make them go home and get them off our campus. And that makes us feel pretty good. But the truth of the matter is that might make us less safe because they might be at home unsupervised. They might be at home, kind of doing a little bit more planning and plotting. We really want to wrap our arms around that child and bring them in closer and really get to the root of the problem and solve the root of the problem. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be consequenced for the comments that they made or the disruption that they made. But that's not the purpose of a threat assessment. We're not doing a threat assessment to see if we can find more goods on you so we can increase the consequence that we issue to you. And that information is inside of the handbook as well. And that is really kind of what an awful thing to conclude on. I should have switched that around. But there's a lot of information that was out there, and we're just grateful for the opportunity to share with you. And we're happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Anybody have?
You guys do a lot. Wow.
We're hopping.
That was intense.
We're hopping all the time. But it's really a lot of fun, to work with sites and with
I
parents.
just want to comment, when I was a teacher here, we did threat assessments. I mean, not all the time, but frequently. And we were able with, district's help, and we were able to turn a lot of those in very positive directions. So, it, like you were saying, that, because I worked, it's not cabs anymore, but a lot of those kids just needed positives. So,
A threat is a request.
yes.
That's what it is. It's a request for you to do something. And I'm guessing somebody in this room, and maybe half of you, made a threat this morning. If you don't put your shoes on and get in that car right now, you are grounded for a month, and I get it all the time. If you don't if you don't close that toilet seat, right? So, and really, what's the request? I just need you to be on time so we can get to school, right? And what the request is, I just don't want to sit in the toilet. So, that's really what the threat is, and we know that. And so we really do work to fulfill the request of the student in a positive, appropriate way.
And sometimes kids just say impulsive things and they don't know what they're saying.
So then search and see thing.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're allowed to check backpacks and their belongings?
We can check your backpacks, we can check your locker, we can check your Google Suite. We can look at your email. We can ask you to pull your pockets out, right? We might take a look inside your shoes. We are not doing a strip search. So if somebody puts that contraband in a very private spot, we are not gonna go searching for it. Now, what we might do is say, we're gonna have you sit here for a little bit. We're gonna call mom and dad. Mom can come in and search you. That typically will change the conversation very quickly.
Only when you're looking for some kind of.
Only, and we have to have reasonable suspicion.
Okay.
And this reasonable suspicion has a time frame. So I can't call the school and say Danielle's got marijuana on her. She had it last week. I've lost my window, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm a credible student, right? And I say, and I go up and I report Danielle has marijuana on her, that now has given me a reason. That now I have reasonable suspicion.
What if it's, the threat is not necessarily like drugs, but could harm like the entire school, like a weapon?
Mhm.
Are they allowed to refuse the search? And how do you, like, if it's a type of, or like maybe it's, you
A
know.
weapon is a really good example. In that case, we're not gonna just send the assistant principal down there we're sending the assistant principal and a police officer down there.
Okay.
So, we're gonna change our process a little bit. Now, we're not an agent of the police officer.
Right.
We currently have reasonable suspicion that police officer does not have probable cause.
Okay.
So that we're gonna have so we bring in our school resource officers and our assistant principals together. So that way we can really have those types of conversations and run through those types of scenarios.
We had a few questions come up. Some I think we're gonna direct elsewhere. One I think is for the superintendent. One that has to do with PBIS and AI. And so we might talk to Sam Doyle to get some more, address this in her presentation next month. This is a good follow-up question. You had talked about school resource officers and some people going back to ADE and instead opting to have a safety officer. Can you explain the difference?
Sure. So, a school resource officer is defined very tightly by the Department of Education. And that is gonna be an officer assigned to the school. And then they also have some other duties that they need to do. They, although no longer required, it's now required by their commanding sergeant to offer law-related education to get more prevention that's out there. And so that officer is assigned specifically to the school. So Officer Russell over at Pinnacle High School, his beat is Pinnacle High School, right? So he's the beat cop for that school. Now, another school, Fireside, a couple of years back, I pointed here because Danielle was the past principal of Fireside. They applied for it and they received a school resource officer, but the city of Phoenix doesn't have an officer to give. So what we did is we gave the money back to the Department of Education. The Department of Education gave it to a company called Off Duty Management. Off-duty management is now going statewide. Literally now, I mean, when this first happened, we had sheriffs coming down from Yavapai County that were working at the school, but they're only there for one day, right? And they're only there for one shift. And so we have somebody on campus that can support in the event of a really big issue, and somebody to offer some guidance, but not in the same capacity as our school resource officer. Our school resource officer is building relationships with our moms and dads and our community. They're fist bumping kids. I want them out there playing basketball, right? But our school safety officer that is there for one day a week is not going to be doing all that, right? And so that really is the big difference.
Okay.
Okay, and then, you're saying towards the end, it was getting a little negative, so we'll start it, question is a little, more of a positive, and maybe we'll end with, positive tone to end with. How are teachers being trained in PBIS, and are they also being trained in positives? A lot of this has to do with restorative practices and discipline, and what, positives are we training them on?
So every school campus is in a different stage of training. So there are 3 tiers within PBIS. The first tier involves some of the actions that you may see or hear your kids talk about, which is providing the lessons within the first 2 weeks of the school year to set and similar verbiage surrounding the expectations that we have on campus. Getting reinforcements, which are the cards that you may see come home, or at the secondary level, you may see a digital form of that, and then reinforcing it with that positive language. Thank you for being safe by, and then naming the specific action. So there's training associated with that. And then they're also trained in pointing out the positives within the classroom when there's a disruption associated with someone's being unsafe. We're going to point out this student who's being safe, provide a reinforcer, reteach the expectation, and then should we need to reteach the expectation many times within a certain time frame, then it's time for some additional support. So we review those reteaching opportunities every 45 days, looking for students who have patterns of 3 or more. That norm, that cycle is set by the school site. And then at the school site also what we like to call, prizes. That's not PBIS language, but within that, the rewards or the prizes are set by the school site. So there may be weekly drawings, monthly drawings, assemblies where students are recognized. So all drawing attentions back to specific behavior that's associated with the acronym supporting the matrix at the school site. So that's how the positives are
That's
framed.
great.
And even I think part of the work that we have is to reframe the concept of some of the cards that we get home as parents. They can be positive or describe that there was a reminder that occurred that day. And so the purpose of the pieces of paper that come home, the purpose of that piece of paper is the communication with the parents. I retaught this expectation today within the classroom. So it's a great conversation to have at home, about that reteaching and what did you learn today, rather than, the old model of detention or demerit, where it's just a negative. So it becomes an opportunity for the parent to have a really powerful conversation with their student.
And then also, I just want to tap in. So the team, there's a PBIS team led by Dr. John Bowen. He goes out and does these TFIs.
Oh, yes.
You want to jump into that?
Yes, it's a tiered fidelity inventory. So our schools at the end of the year are able to have, they're able to have someone from outside the school come in and measure the fidelity for the school site. So what percentage of the staff and the students are aware of all of the language? What evidence of the practice do we see on site? And that helps develop, that's a springboard to help develop the plan for the following year as it pertains to things like professional development, use of the matrix. And we have pop-ins and trainings during the year so that he's able to support the one rep at each site that oversees PBIS. And then we also have multiple trainings happening. So we have schools that are also engaged in our tier 2 cohort, which is a cohort of schools that are engaging in strengthening of tier 2 practices. So students that need just a little bit more support to be able to engage in our expectations. So checking in and out at the beginning and end of each day with specific goals, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, missed anything?
No, I think that it's important that everyone knows that we kind of PBIS ourselves. That we are teaching and reteaching ourselves the expectation of how we interact with students and how we shape behavior. So that way we get a learning environment where kids feel safe, because being safe means that I can take an academic risk and I can ask a question or I can contribute. So we want that happening inside of our classrooms so we can get to the academic discourse and raise student achievement. There's a direct tie between PBIS and increasing student achievement.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys, and thank you all. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to support. Thank you.
Guys have this information.
Thank you all for hanging on. It was a long meeting, long program, a lot of very valuable information. And those of you that are joining us for the live, we're gonna walk over to the other building for that, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Julie, can we say hi to our, can we say hi to our new reps?
Sorry.
Sure.
For all the new reps. So first, I'll just jump in. I want to say thank you to Ms. Wanda, one of our governing board members, for being here. We want to make sure that we said hello to all the new reps. Thank you for your service. Thanks for volunteering. We collaborate and count UPC as a valuable partner. Thank you, Julie, for the time that you spend with both me and my team. But we want to make sure that we met you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email. We're happy to. And I think we'll just go down